Fantastic. Okay, well let's dive in here. I know that there was a little bit of an issue on my end trying to get the live stream working, so hopefully everyone was able to join successfully and we're able to get in. If not, you'll be able to catch the recording after the fact. But thank you all for joining. Really excited to be here. And let me make sure that you can see my screen as well. Stop sharing and restart my screen share. All sorts of issues. Gotta love it. Technology. First time doing a webinar. Never a dull moment. Try again. Okay, we should be hopefully good to go at this point. I apologize for the technical difficulties there, but hopefully we're able to see my screen and we're able to get going here with no more issues. So we're here for talking about how do we actually get AI projects shipped to production. I know it's a big talk these days, all of the AI hype, everything, but there's been a lot of challenges actually getting these into production. And I like to start off these kind of conversations looking at, a former director of AI of ours, Chris Butler, had this great line that without human purpose, a computer is just a rock that we tricked into thinking. So I think it's important when we think about all of these things, we're able to think about that the human is a key element at the side of things within this. So a little bit about us before we get in. We've been building AI projects for the last decade, I would say. ML, and now more recently, the Gen AI is obviously a big boom. But we're a team of makers across the globe that really focuses on the human element of software and how we can bring the human into the experience and think about that from a trustworthy perspective. Because software is ultimately used by the people behind the system. So looking at today's journey, we're going to first start off with a quick look at the current state. We'll make this interactive. We'll then look at the 6 principles that we've come up with for success for these AI projects. And then looking at the stories and actions, seeing how that kind of comes to life. And then finally, we'll wrap up and have plenty of time for Q&A. So let's dive in. We're going to make this a little bit interactive. We've got a few polls. Hopefully, people can participate with them. We'll also have the Q&A on this as well. So grab the screenshot, and we'll make this a little bit fun. So first question we have here is launching an AI POC. Has anyone on the call here had an opportunity to launch a POC with artificial intelligence? We can keep this about Gen AI, machine learning. We'll keep it pretty broad. Hopefully the screen share is working so people can take a quick picture and snag it. Oh, we got someone at least. Now we got him coming in. I know we got to log in a little bit. Okay, we've got some good excitement here. Glad that people were able to participate. Hopefully we can get a few more people to join in the fun. Cool. So we've got a good mix, but we'll start to see here we have a good amount of people that have been able to play around with POCs, but some that are kind of in these different stages. Now I'd like to just check in terms of launching a project to production. So has anyone here on the call had an opportunity to get things into production? If you haven't, that's great too. That will be kind of a key point of my talk. So let's see what we've got. Oh, a good 50-50 split so far. Now we're getting a little more on not to production. Maybe some within the org. Awesome. And we can come back to these after the fact as well. So one of the big things that we've seen, and I think the stats are showing, is that there's a lot of interest, obviously, in generative AI and AI in general. The first, obviously, we've got this. This is a great chart from the Reuters Institute. Benedict Evans put a good presentation of this in terms of ChatGPT usage by country. And you see, we've got a lot of people playing around with it, but the repeat use is not all there. And when you look at enterprise AI and the adoption use cases, it's a similar story. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of POCs, kind of matched up a little bit to that survey at the beginning. But people are struggling to actually get them into production. And there's all sorts of reasons for this that we'll explore. The good news is this stuff takes time. So at this point, everyone's heard about cloud for what, the last decade? Cloud's everywhere. But you see that the reality is that the enterprise work is really still relatively limited. It's around 30% of cloud adoption. And you can see there's always this expectation that there's going to be more in the future. So I think this is important for us to think about, that we're still early, there's still value here. So since we did have some challenges, not everyone has gotten to production yet, and maybe even within getting to POC, I'd love to just kind of, again, poll to see where are some of the challenges that people have run into when launching or building AI projects. And if we don't have any, then we'll be able to pull up some stats from around the globe in a moment here. Okay, might be a little tough to see, but oh, there we go. Limited training resources. Now we're dealing with hallucinations. Nice. Thank you for our participants. I know it's a lot to ask on this lunchtime or morning on the West Coast, or night in the Middle East. Fear, privacy, legal. Oh, scary stuff, I know. Policy, yep. Yeah, lots of good items here. Let this last thing figure out. Okay, so I think a lot of things around kind of real world, where are these challenges that are starting to come into place? So there's been a few surveys that have been done. Bain did a great one. We pulled in some stats from that before. And what they really found was that I would say there's these three major reasons that Gen AI projects in particular have struggled recently. The first is around, the talent is not there, which I think was one of the first item, not having the training resources in place. So great to see there. A lot of challenges, I would say, around the data side of things. So the company tech isn't ready, the data isn't ready to actually go in there. And frankly, this has been something, I'm sure if you've played around with it, that's been going on the last 7-8 years. People are always talking about needing better data, needing better things. And then the big one is really on the trust. There's all of these challenges that we started to see before around, where's this data coming from? What's the regulatory, the legal impact there? And then again, we run into the study by BCG where, again, lack of trust is really a key driver of concerns within the enterprise among executives. You see things around, the traceability of sources being a major issue. Where is this outcome coming from? Not having the kind of consistency with the outcomes. So when we come into this, I think there is a lot of concerns about trust around the talent, and it is early. And so I do want to share that there's still hope. There's still success out there. And just in the last 2 weeks, there's been a couple really prominent companies that have talked on the earnings call about the success that they are having. And I think you start to see there's some pros and cons with all of these things. Walmart talked about kind of the LLMs to speed up content, and really a vast improvement there. Amazon just this week or late last week talked about kind of the ability to upgrade old applications and really saving time on the developer experience. This is something that we've started to see using some of the AI tools to help in the coding process as well. So I think you start to see there are some wins to be had, but there are challenges. And it really comes up to these principles that hopefully we'll share. And my hypothesis, at least, is that if we can figure out how to make people trust AI better, they're going to be more likely to use it. So let's take a look at that. And I think even more importantly, today is a big day. For those of you who don't know, it's NVIDIA's earnings announcement. And so there's a lot of buzz, a lot of hype around what's going to happen. And I think you look at, in general, they have been one of the main drivers of growth. I think they've added a few $1 trillion, literally trillion with a T, in market cap in the last 2 years since ChatGPT was released. And they have really made a foundation of their belief that trustworthiness and trustworthy AI is the key to success for them. So that's, again, I think, further validation that some of these things are there. So this, to me, is kind of where we've come to in terms of what are the 6 major principles? What are the drivers for AI to have success within the enterprise? And we'll dive into each one in a little more depth. Then we'll come into some stories of how these have actually played out in reality. And then we'll wrap up by talking about kind of, some final thoughts in terms of the case studies behind these. So the 6 principles for us are speed, moving quickly, getting small wins, thinking about privacy first and really making that a core driver, then having explainable AI that people can understand and relate to, being agnostic about which model that you use if possible, and then lastly, having the expert in the loop. So let's take a look first at the speed principle here. And so this is really about how do we move faster? You're maybe fast already as an organization, or maybe you're slow. I would say we're pretty fast. We're like a rabbit moving around, but can we use AI to help us move faster, to be more efficient, to kind of give that rabbit a pair of skis? So there's been a number of studies on this recently, and obviously more to come. This was actually a relatively early one from Cornell, and they found, even with the earlier models, that around 15% of tasks might be able to be automated or at least completed a lot faster at the same level of quality. And this study also found out that about 50% of workers could have 50% of their tasks impacted by LLMs. So we do see there is a real opportunity to move faster with these tools. And I'll share a playbook at the end of this call that might help you in the product development process. So how you can move fast, how you can show those wins, because ultimately it's around how do you progress it. I think one of the biggest problems and challenges that I've seen, and really, again, since 2017, 2018, when we were starting to go deep in this work, is teams getting bought up in the hype cycle, which we're obviously in right now, and going big on AI. We're going to solve the world's problems. We're going to save billions of dollars for the firm. The teams get tasked with these audacious goals. Then they go, they push it, they try to get something live, and they come up short. And I think this is a real challenge for teams, is that if you go too big, you're probably going to end up flat right now with the way the models are. But there are a lot of small wins that you can have, that you can show the ROI, you can show to the business, we're making that progress, the investment is worth it. And then you can go back and continue to build and iterate on it after the fact. So really think about, how do you get those wins? How do you continue to roll as you go? And there are, I think, a lot of opportunities where you can start to see this momentum build.
One of the things I've always found is you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that.
So sorry to all the engineers, which we have a lot of and we love, but I think, the great Steve Jobs did a great job of articulating this. This is one of my favorite quotes of his. Really thinking about, whenever you think about the technology piece, what's the business value? What's the customer experience value? And start with this. Again, just tacking on AI for the sake of tacking on AI is not a good reason to use it. And you're going to often run into challenges, run into issues when you do something like that. So don't start with with the AI as the thing, start with what do you want to solve from a problem perspective, what business outcome do you want to achieve, and then work backwards. And AI is a tool in your toolkit, just like a number of other tools are tools in your toolkit to accomplish those things. And think about how do you get that small win to get towards that outcome. We've put together this slide in terms of how do you actually think about understanding your value chain and then thinking about where you might be able to get a great first use case. And so really thinking about looking at the prioritized needs, then kind of monitoring all of those steps through the value chain, looking at that feedback loop and continue to move on. And a little more simply, it's looking at, especially for the first AI use case when you're early on, it's around how do you improve or how do you check things against data reliability and people readiness. And so if you kind of map out where your ideas are, where are your potential use cases across these two lines, you'll start to see, here's the area to start with. And as you get more advanced, as you get more skilled, you can obviously move into some of these other areas where the data reliability is not as good or the people aren't quite as ready. Maybe there's an opportunity to do change management. But when you're early on in the journey, really look for areas where you think you can find good data, you have enough data, you have access. A big challenge within enterprises that we see is that data is siloed between different teams. And so how do you can't actually do a use case because you need to cut across those different teams. So look for areas where you have access to the data and then where also your people are ready and available. The third principle is privacy is king. And again, post Steve Jobs era, but Apple has been very big on the privacy aspect of everything that they do. And it's especially important these days as we think about what data might be leaked to the different model providers, what might be out in the open, where's our private data there, where's our user data there, and obviously all the regulatory and legal risks that come along with that. This is a great tool that I found and really like around kind of how do you de-identify PII data in real time. And so it can be very helpful. They've also got a lot of audits and whatnot that have been done. But it's a great tool in terms of, you could imagine a chat experience with a customer. You're getting information in real time. You want to run that to an LLM to cut the information back and make suggestions to them, to kind of be a co-pilot for your customer service agent. But obviously, you don't want to be sharing this important information out with the LLMs, the name, the credit card number, date of birth, all these things. So private AI will actually kind of mask things, and then as it's going out, and then be a placeholder, and then when it comes back in, it will replace that placeholder with the actual information. So you have this kind of real-time experience where the data is being masked as you go out, and then on the inside it's there. Another thing you can look at around privacy, I like this graphic, not necessarily related to LLMs, is around choosing the right model provider. So think about using a locally host open source model. For example, Llama is gaining a lot of traction. It's performing very well. If you have a lot of private data, something you can store, host yourself, and that data is not going to get out to the provider. But maybe something is a little more flexible and you can actually ship it out to, for example, a provider like OpenAI. So think about, again, the model provider as one of the levers that you have when you think about privacy and kind of regulation as well. The next really big one is really around explainable AI. One of the biggest challenges that happens is that people expect software they understand software as being a deterministic system. So they understand that when they put something in Google Docs, for example, they type something in, they see it on the screen. But AI is inherently non-deterministic. So you don't really know what's happening. It is kind of like rolling the dice. And so we need to give kind of systems, we need to help the user understand where these things are, so it isn't such a black box. And part of that is also explaining to people and sharing things clearly. Google has put together some great research on this. The playbook is linked here, their guidebook, which you can access from the slides, which I'll share out after the talk. But there's 5 major principles that they have within the trustworthy and component of it. So the first is setting the right expectations, kind of being transparent about where your app is, where your experience is good, where maybe it is not as good. And you can then, I think the next big one is same thing as Steve Jobs. Don't sell the technology. In fact, some of the research coming out now is that, especially in consumer apps, and we've seen this in our work on enterprise apps, is that if it has the word AI in it, people actually get scared. Again, people don't care about the technology. They want to know what's the benefit to them. Because these are non-deterministic systems, you're probably going to need a little more upfront onboarding experience, perhaps more change management than you would in a typical application. And then you can pair that with more in the kind of moment training experiences. And then even though things are coming from a black box and you want to share how decisions were made, the goal is, how do you do this at an understanding level and not at a completeness level? If you show the user all the different things that trained the model, all the different things that came back, it's going to be too much jargon, too much stuff, and they're not going to understand it. They're going to get concerned. So share enough, but not everything. And then think about, how do you get the model confidence? So you're being upfront if you aren't fully confident within things. And these are all things that also benefit a lot from doing user testing, actually testing the work, the designs with people, monitoring the analytics, seeing how people are trusting it, and infusing that back in. We've developed a workshop, again, Chris Butler on our team from years back had created this, empathy mapping for the machine, where it takes the idea of empathy mapping for end users, for people, and applies that to the machine element. So thinking about these kind of 5 major buckets, and you can do this workshop at the beginning of a project or in the middle of a project when you're getting to this point, but kind of bring a team together and say, okay, go through each of these one by one, generate ideas, and do some voting on priority. And you'll start to see, like, especially in the say section down below, here's an area where you might be able to, you want to actually think about how we communicate something back to the users. What might be there? The think section is really that training on, like, understanding what are the rules today. The fifth, so the penultimate principle is being model agnostic. Just like a cheetah turning into a leopard, into a lion, these things are always evolving and they're moving very fast. Great book, Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick. One of his key principles is that this is always going to be the worst AI that you're ever going to use. So the models are getting better and better and better. So you always want to think to the future a little bit about where this could go and then layer it back. And this really plays out. If you think of this, like, these are the new models are always kind of one-upping each other, and they maybe perform better in different areas. For example, coding versus creative output versus accuracy. So you should think about, how do you find the right model for the job, if possible, based on what is the goal of your project and what is the privacy requirements, the cost considerations. These things can get expensive. But if possible, try to be flexible so you can jump between the different models. We've created, again, a workshop around that's, I think, gaining a little bit of traction around the confusion mapping for the machine. And this kind of fits into a few of the principles, I would say, in particular. But it's understanding that your results are never going to be perfect. And so before you actually build, before you create something, or even when you're in there, think about, how do you understand what might go wrong and getting out in front of that. So what this has is, on the predictive, on the y-axis, we have predicted. So this is what the machine is predicting, is something happened. And on the actual side of things, this is what actually is happening in the real world, or what you actually expect the result to be. And so these 2 red areas are where things go wrong. And you want to think about, what is the consequence of it? So in a very big, obvious example is kind of self-driving cars. So let's take the use case of autonomous car is driving, and it doesn't see a person in its thing. The model comes back as negative, but in reality, there was a person walking in front of a car. Boom, person gets hit. Very bad, obviously, not a good scenario. The other side of it is, the machine thinks that there was a person walking in front. It triggers something, it brakes, but maybe it was just a bird flying by. And the car brakes, but it doesn't hit anyone. There's not really a negative impact there. So again, not an ideal outcome in the extreme, but a lot less of a serious outcome than the false negative example. So when you're thinking about things, and when you're testing and kind of running your model evaluations, look for where these things go wrong, and don't always go for top accuracy. Just because you have the most accurate model setup, it doesn't actually mean that's going to be the best. When you start looking at where are the other issues, where's the ROI from this, what's the revenue impact, and again, think about how that human can be in the loop towards building those things. And so that's the natural progression to the sixth one. Especially with Gen AI, what we're seeing, I think what the market is saying, is that the models are not quite ready to go fully autonomous, just run with it. You still want to have that person checking things, seeing if things are there, and kind of using that expert opinion before presenting it. There are some situations where you maybe are even going to an end customer, but you're still giving a little bit of guardrails and helping them along the way. So be a little cautious of just running things out explicitly. And a big element for this, and as I mentioned, the explainable AI, is really the testing of AI experiences. And so what we do when we're doing user tests and kind of one-on-one interviews is we map out the feedback on these two quadrants. So on the y-axis, we have understanding and confusion. What does the person who sees the responses, what do they see? And on the x-axis, we have positive and negative, kind of what is their feeling? What are they feeling around things? And so what you start to see is in the upper right section where people understand it and they have a positive reaction to it, that's validated. You're good to go. Whether you've built it yet or not, you can build it, you can feel comfortable. In the bottom right, people understand and they have a kind of a positive element or feeling around it, whatever's being displayed, but they're confused. And so this is really a sign that the UX clarity is missing, that there's some challenges within that. And then we have the kind of bottom left where we have a negative perception and they're confused. This means there's probably some UX that also needs to be reworked, but also the change management aspect of this needs to be put into place. And then the last one is this upper left where people understand it, but they have a negative perception of the software. And this usually indicates that there's a job security, that people are concerned about their job safety. And so what you should do in this case, in this situation, is think about how do you actually bring them maybe through change management. Maybe you need to hide some of what you're sharing with them behind things within the user experience. So these are the elements to think about. And I think when you think of trustworthy AI in general, testing experiences, both live as well as in the design phases, is really critical for this. And think of this kind of 2x2 as a way to understand how you might improve things. Okay, so those are our 6 principles. Again, we have speed. We have small wins, getting that business ROI value. We have the explainable AI, privacy first, model agnostic, and then lastly, expert in the loop. So we'll walk through 2 quick case studies, and then we'll kind of get into some Q&A here. We don't have a lot of some of the recent Gen AI work we can't fully share yet, so we're sharing one of our personal projects, but I think you'll still get the point. So this project with Royal Caribbean that we did a few years ago now was really all about how do we improve the customer experience and get them from the car to the bar a lot faster using technology, using facial recognition. And you can imagine, you got a family on your cruise vacation, you're all excited, you pull into the parking lot of the port, and then you get greeted with a huge line, document check, passport check, visa check, your luggage you're hauling through. Not a great experience. So the thought was, how might we use facial recognition to improve that, to get people onto the cruise ship better? So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a small win, even though it's a little out of order in the principles. And what we were able to do is that in the first week of the project kickoff, we were able to just do a very rough POC and did a play test for our stakeholder, and just models on the computer, nothing fancy, and get this running, get that confidence going. And then we had 4 weeks, they challenged us with doing a play test or doing a live test at a press event. And that's what you actually saw in this video here, is our client going through before the press event is set up and seeing if it worked, right? And so we built this system out. Again, this is only 4 to 5 weeks of work. It's not perfect. It wasn't 100% of the use cases. But the goal was, how do we build excitement internally? How do we prove things are real so we can take it to the next level? We were also able to move fast, and speed is around using Gen AI. It's around thinking creatively about how do you solve problems and get things built faster. So in this case, for the press event, we preloaded all the press photos before the event. We got them loaded in. And so that was a way that we could test our system and have people, even without a mobile app built, even without all this other technology built, we could still prove to them that it was a thing. AI agnostic. When we started the project, Royal Caribbean had a partnership with Microsoft. And so that's where we started with the early tests. But then as we went on, we wanted to see how could we make this a lot better. And so there was lots of exploring of what is the right camera to use, what's the right facial recognition software to use. And we found that by pairing Rank 1's facial recognition with Microsoft and doing some other tweaks to the hardware and whatnot, we're able to move the performance from 10 to 15 seconds and 90% accuracy, which is not bad, to 3 seconds and 97% accuracy. So this is where you want to be flexible. And even since this, they've actually shifted on to newer technology that's even more secure from this work. So it's always about kind of advancing as things are coming, new models are coming, think about how you can do it. Privacy was obviously a top concern for this one. We're dealing with passport information, we're dealing with visa information. We have to be compliant with the TSA, with Customs, Border and Patrol. So looking at partners that we could offload and kind of those extra secure things to, and looking at how we could leverage them, like Microsoft, for example. And then also thinking about things that we might need in the early stages. For example, someone showing up to port, we want to take a few photos of them to generate a more holistic photo that would actually be checked. Those kind of work in progress things get deleted and offloaded after the system runs. So thinking about where do these different elements go is also an important consideration. And then things are going to go wrong. In the real world, it's not all 100%. Some people haven't loaded their passport into the mobile app, haven't taken that selfie. So building that experience, the service design of where things go wrong, how do we bring those people back into an experience? And how do we set up the people at the port or on the cruise ship up for success when things go wrong? And part of that is, again, that explainable AI component of sharing things transparently. So we had this kind of so-called God mode where we were able to show all of the elements, what was kind of the model's response, what were people's perspective, and they could go deeper and they could override the system as well. This is our Gen AI example. So check this out, Exponent.io. It's a free tool. A lot of fun we had building this. But our goal was really, how do we infuse Gen AI into the product development process and into the creative ideation process to create more ideas faster? And so we had things around, we have tools out there for creative ideation, so generating lots of ideas, feature ideas, business ideas quickly, understanding your proto persona, getting to the bottom of things, and then turning your idea into a more clear narrative that you can run up the business. So one of the cool things we did here was the small win stage, was really around our developer at the time on this project, Russell Wolf, started it. And he was able to quickly build in just a couple of days, really, one tool, not our full set of tools, at a lower fidelity perspective. And then as we got validation from users, from the business internally, we were able to increase the fidelity level of the designs and then also increase the number of tools. One of the keys to moving quick is that right now, when you're building these tools, there's a lot of prompt engineering that has to go on behind the scenes. And so we were actually testing our prompts out of the code directly in ChatGPT, in Gemini, and exploring how do we actually bring these things into the experience after they've been tested. And we were also using tools like PromptHub to test these different items fast, to be able to compare across the different models, to understand the cost of the different models, the creativity of the different models. We found in our case that GPT-4 was the best performing, but this might change in the future. And so we want to be flexible in terms of how we might be able to switch things in and out to perform better. And then a key for us was that, again, if we think back to the beginning, InfoBeans, we really care about building software for people. And we think about with AI, how do we build that humanist design? How do we create that experience that's a little bit more better, I would say. And so we really thought about those design details, the human sketch marks, the paper texture. We had loading animations that kind of gave some fun explanations. We've seen a lot of enterprise AI projects where we're actually displaying things that actually slowing down the process with a loading animation. And as part of that animation, showing people the steps that we're taking can actually increase trust. So that's another thing you can look at in the explainable AI approach. And then we had that expert in the loop. We wanted to be able to generate all these things with AI quickly, but we also wanted to give the human, the creative human himself, the opportunity to override something. So looking at, like, for example, maybe they like the 5 whys that were first generated, but then the second round isn't so good. Or maybe they have an idea where the feature's close, but it's not perfect. So just editing that or just regenerating that. So still using AI to speed up the process, but giving the human the perspective of kind of editing, regenerating, and being that expert. So those are the 2 stories. We have a lot more that we can also share and whatnot. But let's just kind of pull this together, and then I've been going on, so I want to get people excited for some questions and make sure we leave time for that. So we'll share out these slides since this is a mouthful on this one, but we've come up with what are the real 10 to 15 key and most important questions for an AI project. And they really bubble into these 5 major use cases or 5 major themes. Again, thinking about how do you show the ROI, the strategic alignment, is this work connecting to the business outcomes? The risk management governance side, thinking about how do we pull that through, the data management compliance side of things. What is that? How are we thinking about things for different regions with GDPR, the accuracy? We know that there's a lot of challenges around data, performance, legacy systems that we're integrating with. How are we going to set ourselves up for success when we're integrating with these legacy systems? And then what is good enough? What are these situations where AI fails, but what is also good enough so we aren't fine-tuning our models to the nth degree? And then lastly, what is the impact on the customers and the employees? How do we actually build that trust so they want to use the system? If you've created this amazing thing, but no one's using it, well, not much value there anyways. And a lot of that, all answering those questions helps you come up with the right governance team and right governance framework. And I think the key elements to think about here are separate the governance committee from the core team itself. Don't be merging these together, because you want to have that neutral group within the organization think about how do you ship this out. Bring in subject matter experts where you need from the outside within the organization, and really think as well about what's the right size of the governance based on what's the risk level of the use case itself. Maybe it's a very low risk, it doesn't have a lot of end customer things, doesn't need as big of a big governance committee, try to move a little bit leaner. But maybe it is something that's going to have a lot of potential impact on the business, and you need to have a much bigger and more, a lot more governance and oversight. And then a really big thing, and this is why, again, I really preach user testing throughout the process, is the change management side. It's around how do you actually get people to use these new systems? There is skepticism within AI. There's worries about job security. There's that trust component. And so a big element of what you can do is think about how you bring the team along for the ride. How do you share that progress to the business so you can stay alive? So you aren't like the AI blockchain teams of past where they did all this work, but they weren't able to show that. Socialize the impact, the improvements you're making within the business so that you do get to keep getting those chances and you get people excited about the potential. And then you start to see this kind of real hockey stick growth over time as things accelerate, as people get more comfortable with it. And then again, I talked about speed. So I've just released this AI-driven product development playbook. So it's really around how do you use AI within the product development process. I cover everything from ideation, market research, requirements gathering, prototyping, development, testing, and go to market. And there's also a lot for each of those sections. I talk about where are the biggest impact areas for AI to augment, and then where are the possibilities for kind of where are things that we can actually take things to kind of move faster and be better as team members. So take a look at this, completely free. I had fun writing it. Hopefully you get some information out of it, and feel free to give me feedback as well. So again, wrapping up, and then we'll dive into the Q&A. We've got these kind of 6 major buckets that we believe. How do you move fast in the product development process, or just cut corners early on to execute faster? Maybe you get some tips in that product development playbook. What are the small wins to show that value to the business early, get the added funding, get that ability in the next step? How can you make sure that you're taking care of customer data, business data, and thinking about that privacy component? When you do actually expose things, think about how do you build trust because you're dealing with a non-deterministic system, because things are in a black box, how do you display that? And then what's the kind of, how are you comfortable swapping out models, improving and looking at, being flexible in case a better model drops tomorrow? And then look at how you bring the human into the loop, the expert themselves, to actually be the final change. And then remember, with all of this AI stuff, at the end of the day, a computer is just a rock that we've tricked into thinking. So don't get too precious, don't get too scared about the doomer mentality of AI running the world. It's our job as technologists to move that forward. So yeah, I hope you learned something. Without further ado, let's dive into some questions on the board here. And there's a QR code for further questions to be added. Okay, data challenges. Yeah, I think this is a big one that's obviously been a challenge over time. It hasn't gone away. Traditional machine learning stuff, ML work, this was really a challenge. And now with Gen AI, we're seeing it more. I think the big areas, the big buckets of challenges that I see are, one, the data not being set up properly. The other big one, as I talked about, was the access side of things. And so you're not having access to data that you need because it's within another group and organization. And so I think one of the big areas, and I just released just about to release a podcast with the chief data officer at Thrivent. And what he really talked about was, how do you build out a data strategy? But then how do you actually go back and try again to get those small wins early on? Don't try to shoot for the moon with all these things, because then the data challenges will never be able to overcome. You'll be spending 3 years getting your data ready for prime time. So you're much better off thinking about the long-term vision, but identifying, are there smaller use cases that we can solve within my team, on other teams, and then can we further kind of execute that and bring that to the next level within these systems. So that's kind of how I think about data challenges, is focusing on the small wins where you have access data, get that momentum going internally. That's going to then unlock you to show to other teams in the business, hey, look at this big win we had. Can you give us access to this data? Unlock that piece, and then working with your data, your overall, if you have a chief data officer or working with these things, how do you kind of continue to execute this into the future within things? So for the Royal Caribbean project, how did you address accessibility aspects, visual issues, for example? So again, there's a few elements of this. For the first thing is, for people coming to port, they're already going to have a check-in process on the cruise. And so they would normally have to go through, show their documentation, their passports, and whatnot. And so what our system did was, we started with kind of the mobile app component of this to collect this information. And we didn't fully address, I would say, all the accessibility issues, but there were some things where you would have, usually it's like a family going, it's not just one person. And so setting up the ability to let people add their family member who maybe has issues. But it's also recognizing that not everyone is going to go through this system. There are going to be a number, especially if you think about cruises, it's going to skew a little bit older, dynamic, demographic. So not everyone is going to be, using the mobile app, for example. And so part of it is also doing the marketing, helping educate people on why they should use it, but then having those fallbacks in place where it's not required. You've got kind of the fast lane, but you still can do it the old-fashioned way of showing the documents, going through the normal process. And I would say, even now it's in port at a number of areas. It's not 100% coverage. You're not getting everyone to go through the system because not everyone has gone through the pre-work that's necessary for this. Now there are some added improvements because there's technology that the TSA and CBP have put out. For example, if you've flown recently, you see a lot of airlines, they just kind of have you go through with facial recognition now onto the plane. So again, there's elements where you now are needing less and less of the photos because our government overlords are tracking a lot of that information and kind of moving it. But yeah, I do think with a lot of these things, accessibility is a key challenge and also a big area of opportunity with AI. I think of, for example, the voice controlling an interface with voice being such a powerful thing. And if you've ever used a traditional screen reader or had a screen reader, it's a very clunky experience. And the person, if they have low vision or can't see, they go through the system where the screen reads things out, but it's very, it goes step by step and they have to say what they want to click on. And so the newer Gen AI work has done a lot in terms of thinking about how do you add, how do you actually get better voice recognition, starting to think about how you can actually control a screen, control a UI based on the voice. So I think there's a lot of excitement from my perspective on how you actually can use these new tools to make the accessibility experience better. Only 2 questions. Great question here in kind of the understanding sentiment and the job security. Well, we found is that not every, people are still comfortable, and that's where you see in the top right, where people are still comfortable with having AI in these systems. And so again, you have to build that trust, and they like it. What's that next step? I would say in terms of how do you actually get things past the point of things and get them excited about it. Now, if something is fully working and they are freaked out about their job, then that's another, that's a broader challenge within the business around, are there new roles for them? It is likely that there might be some redundancy, and that's just, I think, the fact of the matter. But what we've seen in a lot of cases is the desire to kind of upskill people into new roles. And so AI taking away some of the rote task work. Customer service, as an example. Obviously, someone doesn't wake up and just like want to copy and paste from a script to go into a chatbot. They really think about how do you actually, what are the elements within this that could make the human component better. That's how I look at it. With some work that we did with PwC and Google, we were showing dispatchers information. We had to get dispatchers from 100-year-old organization who did things on paper to trust the AI. But the companies did not want to actually replace the dispatchers. They wanted them to do more high value, high leverage work. And so it's really on like, how do you get them to understand this is going to free up your time to do more impactful work? And that's where the change management component plays a big role. I think it's just really the nature of the jobs changing, right? It's like we've all heard the story of the typewriter not replacing jobs. I mean, it replaced some jobs, but it created so many new jobs out there. So everyone that used the typewriter was able to get there. On the security, the security side of things, I think again this is an ongoing challenge and something that you need to work with. I think within that governance committee side of things, thinking about where again are the use cases you can start with to think about how do you actually build trust within these systems, and then showing that value and continuing to go. I'm going to quickly talk about this last one because I want to make sure I cover that off, and then I'll get to this identify this use case one. We'll go back to that slide. So when you're building trust, I mean, what I was trying to get at, and I think if we go back to some of these slides on, let me see if I can go back to the trust side of things. I would say there's 2 big elements here, and we'll just kind of go through quickly for everyone. So the first is really on this, right? It's on like, how do we actually show, how do we actually get people to see where are the elements, where are the things, how can we explain through the user interface itself, what are the right pieces to actually display to them to think about how do we actually make sure we're not confusing them, make sure the experience is good to go. So Google, and this is only one kind of set of their thing around the trustworthy elements, and there's a lot of other tools and research I didn't have time to cover today. So take a look within this and within that. The next big one is really on the user testing side of things, I would say. So just like you're building a normal software without AI, you want people to use it. You want to make sure that it's relatively easy to use, or as easy to use as possible. You want to test your experiences with users, and AI is no different. You can actually test things early on with design prototypes and not using the models themselves. But then how can you actually start to think about how do we bring in the models? Maybe it's even a little bit lighter. We're actually just showing something there or showing some example use cases before you actually build it. And then when you're doing the kind of one-on-one user interviews in your normal traditional way that you would, ask them, what is your level of, like on a scale of 1 to 7, what is your level of understanding of this page? With 7, you understand it. With 7, you don't. You might get them to talk about kind of what are they feeling when they see this information? Would they trust it? So you might want to you ask these sort of questions to get with that. And then I think it's really on like, how do you kind of shift these elements back through the design? How do you improve the UX clarity, which often comes into the elements within this? And how do you think about how do you design the experience so that people do understand it? The other thing that you can try is, which we do a lot of within these things, is this empathy mapping for the machine. You can pair this with kind of more traditional empathy mapping, and that is a great way to look at it. And I think we have time for one more question. I know is around the use case side of thing. There's a lot here, so we'll hopefully share out these slides and can have a follow-up discussion with anyone if you have further questions or want to go deeper into any of this stuff. But we have this kind of, again, data reliability. When we think of what's a good first use case, it's really on like, do you have access to this data within, especially within your team itself, the team that's going to be executing this, and do you have enough of it to make it good? Maybe you have like a couple things of data and you aren't good. It doesn't work. You need to have more to make things more reliable. Again, this depends on this use case. And then the people readiness side, again, is like, where are people's comfort level within these systems? Where is the credibility? Does your team have a lot of credibility, or does this area of your team you have a lot of credibility? Then maybe go focus on that, because you can actually be the one to test out these systems before they're launched, evaluate how they are. With the big thing when you're building these is not to just like rush it out to market and hope it works. It's around testing things, evaluating things, looking at what is performing well, what's not performing well. But the goal is, and I think is especially with thinking of these tools, is you can actually run through these cycles very fast, because you can plug things into a model. You can run Llama, for example, locally on your machine, plug in information and start to test these things without building a whole experience and a whole interface around it. So run tests and kind of figure out how you can understand where the values are as quickly as possible. And then there are some workshops, and this is a workshop that we can help you run internally around kind of prioritizing where the opportunities are within the value chain, understanding your value chain, prioritizing them, and then understanding how you can build data back in with that expert on a loop perspective. Okay, I think we are out of time, sadly. There was a lot of great conversation here, so I really thank you all for joining and participating. Hopefully you got something out of it. Sorry for the technical difficulties at the beginning, but hopefully everyone was able to get a little bit of value out of it. So feel free to drop me a note. I think I'm on LinkedIn where this was hosted live, so feel free to drop me a note with any feedback, as well as if you want to get in touch to talk about any of this stuff in more detail, and we can bring a few more of our team members along as well. Thank you.